Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is Austin West, and he's going to be talking about his work with men's group and mentorship, and of course, psychedelics. His websites are entheosholistics.com, which, just so you know, is temporarily down with some restructuring that is happening. And you can also find Austin online at IamAustinWest.com and find out more about his mentorship and men's programs. We'll be getting to that conversation in just a moment, but of course, first, a few announcements. I have been remiss in thanking Jeff for signing up as a new supporter over at my Patreon page, patreon.com/MartinWBall. Jeff signed up a couple weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to thank him yet, but just wanted to thank him for coming on over and remind you, the listener, that I do have a Patreon page, patreon.com/MartinWBall. There's everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month with increasing access, benefits, gifts, and other such things as you move up the scale. Of course, there is no obligation at Patreon. You can change your support at any time. You can even sign up as a free member, and you can cancel at any point. And it's a great way to support the podcast. And at the top 3 tiers, you can earn a video call with me for integration, for philosophical reflection, for just talking about stuff as you like. And of course, a reminder that I'm available for 30, 60, and 90-minute integration calls and consultations. And you can learn more about that at non-dual-entheogenicintegration.com. Also wanted to thank some people who had been stopping by my Patreon page to pick up some PDF copies of my books that are available at my Patreon shop, and hope you're enjoying the reading. Let's see, I also wanted to issue a congratulations to the second class of the 5-MeO DMT Facilitator Training Course with Mindscape Institute. I'm recording this on a Sunday. The very last class is today, later on this afternoon, and then these students are going to be having their experiential, which unfortunately I'm not able to make this time around, but I hope that it goes well. It's been a pleasure teaching you guys in the Facilitator Training Course. Just amazing discussions and conversations with all the students there, and looking forward to the next batch of students that begins in the end of April. And also just a shout out to my students in the 5-MeO DMT Integration Specialist Training Course. We've now had a month worth of classes, 4 weeks, and that's just going amazingly well, and really enjoying having all of those students in that class. Speaking of students, Sarah Napick, who's been in the facilitator training course at Mindscape and has also been featured here on the podcast in a couple different interviews, she has an offering that I mentioned the other week and just want to remind you of again. Sarah Napick is a spiritual coach and the founder of Altar of the Heart Church in Oakland, California, where she serves Bufo medicine. She is looking for 4 women to join an intimate 6-month container called Devotion, the Path to Peace, that is a combination of coaching and medicine work for real, lasting transformation. This 6-month program will help you to heal childhood trauma, your limited beliefs, and connect to God within so you can follow your heart's calling to create a life that is an authentic reflection of who you really are. She is also offering private medicine journeys with 4 weeks of support through her church in Oakland. You can contact her at sarahnapick.com. That is SarahKnappik.com. And her website for her church should be coming soon, Altar of the Heart Church. Let's see, last thing I want to mention is coming up on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. We've got a brand new interview with Mario Garnier in Mexico. He is running Bufo Camp, a men's retreat. He's also one of the founders of the World Bufo Alvarius Congress that happened in Mexico City. I brought Mario back on to just reminisce and visit and share all about Bufo Camp, and also have a brand new interview with Ashley Booth, who was featured on the podcast maybe as many as 10 years ago. And she has a new book out about internal family systems, and we have a discussion about how it applies to people doing psychedelic work and psychedelic therapy and psychedelic integration. So more great stuff to come here on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. Next week, we'll have a couple more chapters from the audiobook of The Fate of Morani. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode with the soundtrack to Book 3 of Tales of Arduin. The Alchemist and the Eagle, and the stories behind the music. And let's just go ahead and get into it now with Austin West, discussing his work with psychedelics, his men's groups, and Entheos holistics. Here we go. Enjoy. All right. Well, I'm welcoming on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Austin West, who's in Austin. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about it again. But we're going to be talking about Austin's work as a coach and mentor, and doing men's groups offerings, and working with entheogenic medicines, and also his Entheos holistics, and whatever else comes up within our conversation. I've got Austin's websites up here that we might refer to. But anyway, Austin, welcome to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. So let's start with let's go back to where we just were. Austin is in Austin. How long have you been living in Austin, Texas?
Yeah, it's actually, when's the 16th? Are we a couple days away? It'll be a year on the 16th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where did you move from?
From San Diego. Did a decade out there. And then I met my now partner at Wonderland in Miami, psychedelic conference, in November of, would that have been 23? So going on about a year and a half ago. And then, we met at the conference, FaceTimed every day for a month. I came out and visited, and 6 weeks later, I packed up my bags and moved to Austin. So thanks to the psychedelic space is kind of why I'm here.
All right. So I was just kind of rummaging around through your websites here, and actually maybe it was on Facebook. It said that you participated in the Synthesis Institute psilocybin facilitator training program here in Oregon. So have you also been here in Oregon?
Not in Oregon. So I did the online program. So
okay.
A lot of my instructors were here in the US, but all the curriculum and the Synthesis is home based in the Netherlands.
Right.
I did the program that allowed, once you graduate and you get the certificate, you're supposed to be able to participate in the legal psilocybin therapeutics in Oregon. I was doing the program while they were developing a lot of the curriculum and the certification requirements. And then the state kind of pulled back on some of it. And halfway through the program, they actually made a requirement they had to live in Oregon. So it wasn't the requirement when I was there. And then halfway through, they're like, okay, now you can only do it if you've lived in Oregon for 2 years. So after I would have graduated, I have to move there for 2 years before I was able to do it. So was kind of a mess towards the end. And I'm really glad I did it, right? It's like to learn. I did a 3-year apprenticeship with my teacher. He lived in Oaxaca for a couple of years back 20 years ago when this stuff was very underground still.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's trained from the great niece of Maria Sabina. And so he's trained from that lineage, right? Kind of the OGs of why it's in the Western world. I learned far more in my apprenticeship with him than I did in a model of instruction that's very heavily based in Western philosophy.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful to kind of merge the two worlds, right? To get the more scientific, if we want to call it that, lens and approach, right? That the Western world has of seeing things, and then the more metaphysical and spiritual approach as well. So it's either way, I'm happy I went through it.
Yeah, well, actually, this sounds like kind of an interesting place just to start. I mean, I usually start with, well, tell me your story and all about you. But actually, since we're already in it, it's kind of interesting. So let's maybe unpack it a little bit more. With the Synthesis, so I haven't been too up on, the details around the Oregon psilocybin program. Kind of my, not really a claim to fame, but my association with it is largely that I organized the first talk for Tom and Cherie Eckert back in 2015 when they first started organizing and proposing the psilocybin-assisted program here in Oregon. So they came and they gave a talk here in Ashland in the summer at Jackson Wells Springs, and I organized that talk for them and organized a number of talks for them over the years as kind of leading up to the vote for that. But other than that, I haven't been too much involved in it. I've had a few people on the podcast who have been through training programs, who have run training programs and things like that. So have some knowledge of what's going on there. But with like Synthesis coming in, I believe, wasn't there some kind of issue with Synthesis where they like lost their funding? or something like that. And I'm even wondering if maybe they misled you, because it was my understanding all along that the program to be a facilitator, as Tom and Cherie were developing it, was that you needed to be an Oregon resident, that they weren't going to be giving out licenses to people who weren't Oregonians to kind of protect the Oregon scene in a sense. So if they had told you that you could get it from outside but not be an Oregon resident, I'm just wondering if maybe they didn't have the correct information. But it's my understanding that that was the program the whole time, and it wasn't a later addition. But maybe you know more.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you went down this avenue, because there was some trickery came to mind, but that feels a little bit more nefarious than I want it to. When it was a pretty lengthy interview process, right? Like I had 3 calls before I got in. I think it was, just based on memory, dozens of questions. I mean, they really wanted to go deep and ensure that you were doing this for the right reasons. You weren't just trying to skirt legality and get this program. And a lot of what was told to me in the interview process was, yeah, this is where it is now, but just trust me, it's going to be opening up, so you're not going to have to move here. It was that kind of languaging. Yeah. And so you are correct. That was what was very black and white listed, but every conversation I had was not very black and white.
Right.
It was very like, oh, we're just starting with Oregon, but based on the conversations we're having with state officials, this is going to bleed into other states rapidly. I mean, it's been 3 years and not a single thing has happened, right? So I have compassion. Maybe those conversations were being had. I would like to believe so, because anybody in this space, we all want this to grow and move and these certifications to expand outward. I do know that there were talks with what was happening in Colorado, but not much movement has been made. And then fast forward to, it was a 15-month program. About 10 months into the program, Synthesis ended up going bankrupt.
Yeah.
And this was less than 3 months out from my graduation date, because after you graduate, then you had to go do your curriculum at the retreat centers and stuff. But less than 3 months before I was supposed to graduate, all of a sudden we get an email. It says class is officially canceled and then there's nowhere to show up. And it was just like, what the hell are you talking about? And this happened. I think this went 2 or 3 weeks. And then I ended up getting a notification from my pod instructor. So we met every Thursday for 4 hours with our group of 8. That was my pod, went through the whole program together. And my pod instructor she's like, I'm sorry, but I'm breaking the silence. I'm not supposed to talk to you guys, but we're going to have a call this week if you're ready to be on. So our whole pod got on, and she just let us know everything going on. So it was disheartening in a way that we had to hear it from somebody who was, quote, breaking the rules to even inform paying students what was happening with the curriculum and our certification and everything. And then, as most people know, that was very public. They were able to raise the funds, collect the money. It shut down for a rough total of 6 weeks. They back paid all the instructors. They got the program back in line, and we ended up still being able to graduate. But it wasn't a good feeling to see one of the biggest names and certifications and education platforms in the world, who had been around for 12 years, to see that happen, to see such a broad misappropriation of funds. And again, it's from what we were told, buying 2 retreat centers that they shouldn't have bought because they expected legalization to open up, which ended up getting delayed, still delayed years later. So there was a lot of fuckery, excuse the language, that was going on. And it's like one of my closest friends and business partners in the medicine space now was in my pod. Like, my instructor has been a huge supporter and turned into a dear friend. Like, I've hosted retreats with one of my people in the pod. So it ended up becoming about everything that wasn't Synthesis, that Synthesis brought me. And they're up and running now, and they're a little bit more efficient, and they're pumping out cohorts. And I have 2 friends that have gone through it since I've graduated and have had good reviews. But it's just always a shame to see that kind of stuff in the medicine space,
Yeah. Well, let's get into the topic a little bit then of sort of the difference between, I think what you've already described a bit is kind of a dry clinical approach in the Oregon psilocybin program. I mean, the big emphasis is on ethics, safety, rules, guidelines, making sure everyone does everything. I mean, a few weeks ago, I had Emerald Valley Institute team on, and they also do a psilocybin training program. They're up in Eugene, Oregon, and we kind of talked about all the I's you got to dot and all the T's you got to cross. And, basically it is a very kind of dry sort of setting, the idea that, well, you have your facilitation facility where someone goes in, they lie down, they put the blind shades on, they listen to music, and then you sit and watch them for 5 hours. And, it's with all the intake and then the afterwards integration. So it's designed to guide people through in a very, very sanitary kind of way. But it's not for anyone who might think like, oh, I could go to Oregon and it would be like comparable to going to Mexico and eating mushrooms in a ceremonial way. I mean, that's just not the program at all. And it has its usefulness, but it's very dry in that sense. So I'm curious that you said that you had a mentor who had studied in Mexico. How would you describe or characterize sort of the differences in approach and how psilocybin mushrooms are used in a different kind of cultural context, which again, the Oregon context is not trying to replicate that in any way. And it probably shouldn't, because that would be cultural appropriation anyway. But what would you have to say from that sort of other side of historical cultural use of mushrooms and how that would differ and what people appreciate about these other approaches?
Yeah, I think you nailed the important thing about what we are doing in the Western world with this, which is building the container for how these ceremonies should be had. Now, how they're run, I radically disagree with. We're medicalizing something that should not be medicalized, right? Which is the exploration of consciousness. These, and this is what a lot of ketamine clinics have had troubles with. You put people on a gurney bed in a white wall room with a nurse that has never experienced a psychedelic trip and put them through a journey and expect them to have profound results just because they're on the medicine. It's like, whoa, man, we're not doing this right, right? And so I think the beautiful thing about what they have done is set the stage for the ethics, which is the most important thing. In the Western world, that matters a lot because we have detached so far from that in so many areas, especially when it comes to explorations of consciousness and altered states and what it means to, and this is going more deeper into my beliefs that most all of this is just nervous system work. It's nervous system and consciousness work and the intersection of what that really means, right? How our consciousness interfaces with reality through the nervous system. If you don't build that ethical framework, you're not instituting safety into the metrics of everything we do. And so I think they nailed that part. Now, everything else I've taken from the more indigenous approach. And it's because and this is kind of getting deeper into what my philosophy is with what's wrong with allopathic care in the first place, is it's targeting symptomology. Like, what do we have to do to go after this symptom? But you look at through all of history, through every philosophical tradition, through every religious or spiritual tradition, Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity, Jewish mysticism, Platonism, the teachings of Socrates, ancient Roman Greek philosophy, all of it talks about the human experience being in the mind, the body, and the soul. And that's what I think psychedelics are so powerful, is because they're working in the realm of all three of those things. And so the teachings I was able to get from my teacher, who got the direct teachings down in Oaxaca, was starting to understand all three levels that are taking place in the experience. And so it starts with the material. And so when we open up ceremony, like, you're speaking to this consciousness that we call a psilocybin mushroom, right? This is an entity. It's no different than you and I. It's just experiencing its own consciousness and its own manifestation that Mother Nature has chosen to embark upon it, right? And so it's really sitting with the intention and praying and meditating with it. And even the way that you take it, like in the West, here's a glass of water and your pill, swallow it when you're ready. It's like, whoa, like, we're not really easing in. Like, the ceremony starts far before we ingest the medicine. And so one of the things that I was taught to do is it's ingested, it's on a wood plate, it's given to you, and you have honey, you have cacao and the mushroom, and you take a bite of a full cacao bean. Then you dip the mushroom in the honey, and then you eat it. And You do that until it's gone, and you only chew with your 8 front teeth, 4 front, 4 bottom, because it's sacrament. It's not food. So it's not this swallowing of a pill or making a tea that you drink down. It's like even being really attuned and present to how we're ingesting it. And just the intention that the second that enters my body, the act of chewing it with only my front teeth, with the honey, with the cacao, mixing all of these energies together with that level of intention on how it opens up the ceremony space so much differently than if I'm lying on a gurney bed and I just swallow this capsule, right? And then when you go into the experience, they're not trained to be hands off. And so the modalities that I was taught is working with the physical body. And it is prompting and pushing and pressing. Now, there's differences between different medicines I've worked with, but with psilocybin, it is very much an internal journey. So you don't want to interrupt too much, but you are doing check-ins every 30 to 45 minutes. And if somebody is not processing or moving energy, the role of the facilitator, as far as the way they're trained, is we are there to help them move that energy. We're both holding the container of it to be witness, right? And this is why it's important as a facilitator to do your own deep work, because the depth in which you have gone yourself is going to limit the capacity and depth in which the person in front of you can go, which again gets into the wild thing about somebody holding space that's never done these medicines.
Yeah.
And in those prompts and check-ins, when you notice someone's stuck, you can guide them to a part of the body. And through that energetic and physical maneuvering of the body, you can open up, like the book, The Body Keeps the Score, you can open up emotional and traumatic pathways to be relived in the psychedelic experience that helps us reprogram it and end up turning this thing into a gift. What most people think is a bad trip is actually a big blessing that at one point in their life they will realize, right? So they're working on the mind, they're working on the body, and they're working on soul, which the tradition that I was trained through considers the soul to just be the now. It's the present, it's the eternal, it's the infinite. Right. And so when we're working with the soul, the job of the facilitator is to be so hyper in our own meditative state that we're not ruminating, because our rumination, our distraction directly impacts the journey of the individual we're with now. And this is true in one-on-one and retreat settings. And so it's really taking all 3 components of this. It's like letting the mind operate within the realm of the consciousness of the mushroom, working with the body through somatics, through guidance, through the emotional opening, and being so hyper present in the now that we're actually allowing the medicine to do what it is designed to do without interference from the facilitator. I learned none of those things by going through that kind of program, right? And so it's just really, really interesting perspective on how these worlds migrate. And I think it's important. Yes, the indigenous have held these medicines for some traditions, hundreds of years, some like the Shipibo, thousands of years with ayahuasca, right? But there's something beautiful about modernizing some of these things, because the modernization in some ways get to speak to masses that otherwise they wouldn't be reachable. And so how do we take the sacredness of the indigenous with the abilities and the structures that modernization can bring us, and really create a sacred ceremony space in that way?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you raised all of those issues. And I think it points to the fact that ultimately we need all of these approaches. And most likely, I think we need more hybrid approaches in some ways, where I do think that the really intense focus on ethics and propriety, and like you mentioned, that there's no touching, there's no guiding, there's none of that involvement that happens at the somatic, emotional, energetic level. And that's good in the sense that we want to create safe environments where people feel like, you know, everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do. But it does leave out that there are highly effective approaches that can be utilized through these other kinds of methodologies, and that some people actually are actively looking for that. But again, some people aren't, and they're going to be more comfortable. Well, if I can just go in a room and if I can lie down under a blanket and I'll be there for 5 hours and you're just going to watch me, that makes me feel safe. So that not necessarily everybody is looking for those other modalities or even ceremony, that they might just be looking for, look, I'm just fucking depressed and I'm just looking for something to help get me out. So I'd like to, just kind of second what you shared here, that there's value in these other approaches. And I think that if we get too clinical, too medical, we're missing out on, in my opinion, would be the deeper aspects of the work that can be done. And it sounds like that's probably a view that you would share as well.
I agree. And I think one of the words that's pinging me you spoke was safety. I heard Charles Eisenstein speak. It was actually at that same conference. It was at Wonderland in Miami. And, Charles is known for being kind of radical with his thoughts, and I love it. And that's why I think he's a brilliant philosopher of today, and the way he looks at economics and the medicine space and so many other things. His myth of separation is brilliant. But he made a note specifically about safety relative to psychedelics. He said, until we stop making safety the top priority, psychedelic medicine will never be what it's meant to be. And he goes, and he again made the point, when you look at the wisdom carriers, the indigenous, the ones that have been holding these ceremonies for centuries, they're not concerned with safety. It's like you go look at some of the Bwiti in West Africa and Gabon. It's like they're having their kids as early as 11, 12, 13 years old going on a full-blown iboga experience, right? And then rites of passage where they need to survive in the bush for a few days on their own. Like, that is just so beyond what we can comprehend in the Western world. But it's because they're looking at it as a necessary evolution for that little boy to become a man, specifically when they're working with the boys in their culture, right? And it's like, safety is not the top priority. And because it's not, they end up having this evolution that sets up the groundwork and the framework for their entire life. And so we can look, same with a lot of the Shipibo and how early they're doing these things as well, right? I agree with that. And it's not to say that safety doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But making it the top priority, especially when we're trying to medicalize explorations of consciousness, which, like, even saying that in the same phrase is so wild to me. It's limiting the capacity of experience, I think, that a lot of people are able to have, which is why they end up going out of the country and seeking these more authentic experiences that they've done the trial and error for centuries. Like, they understand that this is the way to do it because it's the most profound way to integrate these medicines into our life.
Yeah. And that things like crisis, catharsis, loss of control, moving through intense fear, intense egoic shattering, those can be catalysts for growth. Mm-hmm. And especially when we're looking at indigenous societies, they've had to live at the whims of nature, essentially, where nature's a bitch, man. It's cruel. You cannot control nature. And so we kind of live in this bubble of illusion that, we want everything to be safe. We want to control everything. We want everything just to be kind of neutered. But when we're dealing with reality, that there are lots of things that are out of our control, and that sometimes we need to go through crisis in order to grow. We need to be challenged. We need to be shattered. And if we're just always taking little kid gloves and trying to baby everyone, that maybe it's a good starter. I would say that it's a good starter for somebody. But if they really want to encounter growth, they're probably going to have to move through some shit. And it might not be in the very limited framework of what we decide as proper versus improper, or right versus wrong. And that, like you mentioned, the Bwiti. And my understanding is that sometimes people do overdose and die on iboga. And that's part of the tradition. Yeah. It's accepted that not everyone's going to make it through. Or like you mentioned, Shipibo, I've seen documentaries of young men, like, really, they're still just boys in my eyes. Like, look at them like, man, they're still just little boys. They've got to go through the thing where they put on the mittens with the bullet ants and they're biting them, and you're like not allowed to cry. And from the modern Western perspective, is like, oh my God, this is the most horrific child abuse. It's like, but look, these people need to grow up in the jungle where they could be bitten or stung or attacked by any number of things. And this is part of the reality of living there, that you might get attacked by bullet ants. And so you need, in a sense, you need to acclimate yourself to the reality that so much is out of our control. Pain and suffering is an inherent part of life. And living with it and not just trying to put Band-Aids and safety bumpers on everything is going to fix all your problems.
Oh, brother. And it's, one last note about the Buiti is I had a buddy who was a Navy SEAL 20 years, got out, depressed, anxious, suicidal, PTSD ridden, right? Like most of those guys, especially in the special forces are, and went to West Africa and sat with Iboga and came back. And the dude was just radiant light, like radically changed his life. And so he ended up dedicating his life to it and went and lived there for 3 years. And now he's an Iboga practitioner. And my first time sitting was actually in his space. And for somebody that hasn't done Iboga, the first couple hours of the ceremony is you're around a fire and you're eating the medicine like every 45 minutes, and they're downloading their wisdom, their tradition that has been carried for hundreds or thousands of years. They're downloading that wisdom into you as the medicine is coming online. And one of the of everything he spoke to me, one of the things that stuck the most, which is one of their deepest teachings, is, and he painted it in the lens of what the Western sickness is the sickness of the Western mind is we have lost the ability to accept everything as the perfection it is. Mm. And so, like you said, they will take somebody at a very young age through an experience that may die. And the way that they grieve with that is they give themselves 24 hours to process everything they need to. They don't have these protectors online like we do, where it's like, no, I'm going to hang on to this. And we love sitting in our grief, which ends up projecting out as victimization. All these things we do in the Western mind, they allow themselves to really just feel the depth of pain that is caused from a situation like that. And then after that 24-hour window, they come to a place of acceptance, because past that, you're allowing yourself to live in a place that's limiting the full capacity of your life. And so even when those situations do happen, it's like, let's grieve and honor that person. But now we accept and we move on, and we have gratitude for that person, for that being their soul's journey to teach us something in that reflection, right? It's a beautiful way of living life.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, Austin, I've really enjoyed just jumping right in with you. But let's go ahead and let's rewind now, and we're going to get to the point where I'd like to now get some background about you and invite you to kind of tell your story, because everybody who works in this space has got a story of what got them into it and what changed for them. And so there's the part where I want to invite you just to share whatever you'd like from your own story, which I assume you have.
I do, yeah. Especially when it comes to fun of the medicine, right? We always have that perfect drop-in moment with it.
Yeah.
The start of my downhill climb into the dark night, right, into my rock bottom moment was when my father walked out when I was 14. And it's not an unfamiliar story, right? At least for my generation, 52% of households this happened. And I think it's in the way it happens and the relationships that are had and the post effects of that really determine the trauma, to be the big T trauma that can come from that. My dad was my best friend. We spent every day together. I went to work with him every single weekend from the time I was probably 4 or 5 years old up until the day he left. And we had no idea. They never fought. We thought the household was safe. And then my first day of spring break, my 8th grade year, my dad didn't know we were on spring break. And so he thought my siblings and I were going to be at school that day. And so that was the day he was going to pack his stuff and end up leaving and then tell everybody after he was gone. He thought that was, again, compassion. Looking back, I'm grateful this happened because of the evolution. But looking back, it's like, whoa, you were going to actually leave and then tell us? So when he's packing the truck in the morning and he sees the kids in the living room, he's just like, oh shit, what's going on here? And so he was kind of forced to sit down and tell us that I'm leaving now. And my mom didn't know. No one really knew what was going on. So he left that day. My mom found out while she was at lunch at work on break that day. And it started the unraveling for me. I mean, within a few months was the first time I got drunk at 14 years old. Started getting high at 15. First time I snorted coke was 16. Started injecting and taking oral steroids at 17. By the time I graduated high school, I had messed around with Xanax, Valium, Percocets. I was pretty addicted to somas, which were an easy muscle relax. And being in Arizona, 4 hours from the Mexico border, you could walk across the border and buy them at any pharmacy. And so they went around a lot at our high school. This led to the steroid abuse led to erectile dysfunction by the time I was 20, which got me hooked on Viagra and Cialis. I took that every time I had sex from 20 to 32 years old. So I was in a deep addiction there. Pornography, video games. I mean, I did everything I could to numb from the pain that I did not know how to process at that age.
Yeah.
And all of it lasted until my early 30s. The drinking, the coke, the pornography, the video games, any substance that gave me the falsity of happiness through the projection of fun, I was all in on. Right? I was constantly conflating my fun with happiness. But every time I'd go through that, I'd wake up the next day back in the same place. So I'd just go and do it again.
Yeah.
And these behaviors really dominated my life from 14 to, I'd say, 32 years old. And I always considered myself, or I never rather consider myself an addict because I was so functional. I graduated business school with honors. I was a high school football captain. I was a state champion. I was the prom king nominee, right? I opened my first multi-million-dollar business at 22. I helped start and ran a company into $100 million company in 3 years. I was a VP by 26. I had the accolades. I had the money. I had the fancy cars. I had the women. And I was suffering. And so it's like on the outside, I put on this really polished exterior, fronting and acting if I was okay, but I was depressed and I was anxious and I was addicted. You know, I do the whole cycle, and I know a lot of men go through this is, oh, I only party Fridays and Saturdays. You know, come Monday, I'm okay again, but I just substituted the alcohol and the women and the cocaine for Adderall, video games, and workaholism, right? It's like 7 days a week, I needed to be drowning in something to avoid what was going on in my internal world. Mm. And then one day I couldn't walk away from it anymore because of the mushrooms. Went to the beach with a friend. He offered me a mushroom chocolate. And I remember about an hour after eating the chocolate, it almost felt as if time stood still. But in hindsight, what it really was my mind standing still.
Yeah.
The constant mental chatter and self-deprecating, abusive thoughts and the depressive thoughts, which is, I believe, the inability to accept anything that's happened in my life, the inability to accept that I was depressed in the first place, right? The anxious thoughts where I was constantly in this like panic-stricken place before bed every night and in the morning every night. It's like that last 30 minutes before bed when I was alone and in my own mind, and that 30 minutes in the morning when I was alone and in my own mind before all the distractions kicked up. The only way I can explain is like a panic. It's like I felt like I wanted to jump out of my own soul. It was so uncomfortable. All of that all of a sudden was just gone. All of it. And being at the beach was like the perfect place to be, right? You're just hearing the waves and people laughing and kids are running around playing. It's like a beautiful way to kind of enter into that even on a microdose level. I would say it's about 250 grams, enter into that medicine space for the first time in an environment where you're just able to be. And it shattered everything for me, because in that quietude, in that reflection, in the clarity of what I was feeling, what I was thinking, the situations I had been in, because of what the psilocybin had given me, I couldn't unsee it anymore.
Yeah.
I was so confronted with the truth that I did not like my fucking life. I thought I did because I had everything society told me I should have. I have the pretty women. I have the $1 million condo 8 minutes from the beach in one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. I should be happy, right? I have the fancy job title that I've spent since high school so overly concerned about what my resume looked like. It's like hired by corporations that were just going to suck my creativity and purpose out of me, right? Those weren't the answers. And I was able to explore and live those up until this perfect moment, this medicine entered my life for me to really be with the fact like, fuck, man, this isn't it. And then that opened up my journey. And so within a year of that date, I had done a few of my own, like self-guided, about 1 gram to 1.5 grams journeys.
And just to check in on the timeline, yeah. When was this first mushroom experience on the beach?
2019.
2019. Okay. Please continue. Just wanted to get the date on that.
Yeah. So that was, I think it was March or April 2019 was that day at the beach. March 15th, 2020, 3 days before the world shut down, was my first guided psychedelic experience. And so I did a hero's dose with my teacher 3 days before the world shut down and the COVID mess hit. So I come out of my awakening to literally reality around me collapsing. And it was a wild, because then I was in San Diego. So then I was thrown into isolation for the next 4 months. Yeah. Right. And it's all its perfection and beauty. I really went deep and I got to build a relationship with the medicine. I sat a lot over those 4 months and a lot of remote guidance and instruction, but I just really started to build a relationship with this medicine. Even through all of that, I kept living the lifestyle, man. I kept dipping my toe back into the party scene and the women and the drugs. And then the thing I appreciate about psychedelics and what I believe they are, to put plainly, like you and I could rap out for hours about what they are, right? But to put it as simply as I can, is the arbiters of truth. They bring to the surface what's already there that we are ignorant of, suppressing ourselves, distracting ourselves, or protecting ourselves from. And so every time one of these experiences, it get louder and louder and louder how miserable I was. And then I'd dip my toe back in and I'd come out worse the next day because I had to get to the point where it was so overwhelming. It was so depressive. It was so anxiety ridden that I had to break. It made me eventually break. And that break happened in September of 2022. I logged into my computer. I was managing a really large team in the mortgage business at the time. And I logged into my computer. It cleared out my emails before. It was 10 a.m. I had 100 emails already. And I broke, had a panic attack, fell to the floor, crying in the fetal position for probably an hour. And I'd done enough medicine work at that point. I'm just like, just let it go, just let it pass. You know? And I got up after that. I quit my job on the spot. I put my house up for sale 6 weeks later, and I sold it to give me runway to pursue what I actually wanted to do in this life, which is serve this medicine and bring people to their own freedom.
Oh, I think it kind of gets to what we were kind of mentioning about the sort of the safety issue, that for you needed the crisis. You needed to actually just go deeper into the pit and go deeper into the pit. And I like what you say about working with these medicines, is that they're ultimately about truth. That I like to say, I use the same thing. I say, yeah, there's like truth serum. And that when we're coming up against our own internally created prison of our attachments and our illusions and the stories we've been telling ourselves, it's like a metal cage. And when we're working with the medicine, sometimes what's happening, we don't know we're headed for a breakthrough, but it's bending the metal. It's not broken yet, but it's bending the metal. And if you bend metal enough, sooner or later, the damn thing's going to break. And when that happens, sometimes it happens into bliss, love, light, and ecstasy. It happens that way. And other times it happens with, oh my fucking God, what the fuck have I been doing? Look where I am. And it doesn't matter where it breaks, actually. The most important thing is that it breaks so that you have the opportunity to really honestly assess at that point, who do I want to be? Do I want to live in truth, or do I want to keep playing this fucking game that's killing me? And maybe killing other people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, if we're too concerned about safety and making sure, let's make sure Austin has a good time and that, he's not feeling anxious or stressed. You actually needed that. You needed to hit that breaking point, and that became the inspiration. That was the catalyst for then becoming something new. And even there, I like to say, nobody ever becomes anything new. They just become more of what they didn't realize they were in the first place, right? Because it's always been there, right? It's just a matter of uncovering it and not playing the trauma game that we've been stuck in. And I don't mean to trivialize trauma, but when it becomes our identity and then we build our identity around that, we're like, for you, kind of grasping at these exterior symbols of achievement, money, cars, women, success. But if you're not connected to your heart inside, I mean, who the fuck cares, really?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
You hit the breaking point. It's good.
Yeah, and it's I want to touch on one thing you said, because I think it's potent. Is there's a quote coming through, and I can't remember who said it, but it's not that we don't like who we are. We don't like who we think we are.
Yeah.
And so the psychedelic experience, to your point, all it's doing is shedding all the parts that actually aren't who we are.
Right.
And sometimes those parts fight hard
Yeah.
because they want to stay alive. And it can be a thing. And then the next thing I want to point out is a lot of people expect the psychedelic experience to be, or just after, maybe when that break happens. A lot of times it's months later. Like the experience is working within your psyche, and consciousness and soul far after the experience. So that breaking point I finally had was 5 months after I did ayahuasca for my first time. And I did no medicine between the panic attack and burning my life to the ground and that experience. And so, but I absolutely attribute it to the ayahuasca retreat I went to in April, to the panic attack I had in September. Each week that went by, it was louder and louder and louder. Yeah. And I remember looking back at how many days I would be in front of my computer and I'd have to like shake because I felt so anxious, like I'm not supposed to be doing this. And it was so overwhelming that I didn't want to feel it. So I pushed it down and I'd show up again the next day. And I'd shove it down and show up again the next day and the next day and the next day. And then after you end up having that breaking point, you're like, oh, fuck, I was ignoring my own truth for months. And that's where most people are stuck. They hear the whisper. They see it clearly. They know exactly what their soul wants to do, what they're supposed to do. And where, I love the terminology of the daemon, right? The Greeks believe that everybody was born into this life with some sort of guardian spirit that loves you more than anything in the universe. And all it wants is the best for you. And so it's constantly whispering to you what you need to hear for your most rapid and largest evolution. We're hearing that thing go all day long. We've just gotten so good at gaslighting it and pushing it away that eventually it'll build over time, and it leads to the manifestations of those symptoms that we call depression, anxiety, panic attacks, right? That is the expression of you not listening to your soul's purpose. And for me, my ego was so large that I was very good at shoving it down until it became so undeniably loud that I had to listen.
Yeah. And just want to highlight a couple of things that you shared here. One of the ways that I like to characterize all entheogenic medicines is I say, well, they're just energetic amplifiers. They're amplifying the energy of what is. And what you've just shared here is a bit of a demonstration of that. So you kind of go through this cleansing or this transformation process with the ayahuasca itself. So you've opened up this energy, and the energy is going to find like, okay, where you're holding on to bullshit, Austin, we're going to find your bullshit. We're going to make you really uncomfortable with it so that maybe you'll choose to drop it and let it go. So you say you heard that, but you're like, no, I'm going to suppress it. But then like you motioned that you showed that the energy was still working in your body, that you're feeling tremors, you're feeling vibrations, like, fuck, I've just got to suppress it. And this is where I always like to invite people, like, look at how your body is responding to whatever it is that you're thinking or that you're feeling or that's going on. And this is going to be amplified when you work with medicines. You're going to notice, how is my body responding? What am I doing with how the body is responding? How is the ego responding to how the body is responding? Is it allowing or is it suppressing? And then again, it's like, it's the metaphor of the metal. It's that it keeps bending you, and you're like, nope. But finally it's going to break. And I would just want to join in concert that, that's the impact of the ayahuasca session. It doesn't matter that it happened 5 months later, because the energy, which is you, is working on you, pushing you into the discomfort of your illusions and your holdings, and inviting you to, do you want to continue to make yourself totally miserable and uncomfortable and just hold on to this shit? Or do you want to break it and find something new? And that's, so I like to say, like, this is not like a feel-good methodology. It's not like, oh, let's take your fucked up life and let's make you feel better. It's actually, let's amplify to the nth degree everything that's really making you uncomfortable, so that hopefully it makes you so fucking uncomfortable that you choose something more authentic.
Yeah.
And that's when it starts to feel good. But it's not the fun chasing, like you talked about, like just looking for fun. Like it's more fun when we've gone through the hard stuff and we've processed it and we've accepted that maybe my reality is something other than what I've been choosing to construct it as.
Yeah. Shattering of that paradigm.
Yeah.
Right. Because so many of so much of the reality we live in until we hit that breaking point where we need to shatter the mirror, so to speak, to figure out what do we want to be looking into, is the realization that your reality is built by what is given, unless you're willing to explore what is true and untrue for you.
Yeah.
Right? Society, religion, parental, cultural programming is, Bruce Lipton talks about this in his work a lot, is the first 14 years, right? 0 to 7 and then 8 to 14, 7 to 14. And I can't remember who it's attributed to. It's Saint Augustus something. It's not a very well-known individual, but he has a great quote: "Show me the first 7 years and I'll show you the man." Right? It's like most ways people live their life is based on the programming that was given to them. And as you get older, it gets so much more loud because you start to realize that it doesn't resonate to who you really are. And this is where those psychedelic experiences can be powerful. Most people already feel the incongruity, right? They're already discontented. They just don't know. When you don't know, right? They don't know that there's another experience of life waiting for them. And then when you think about the psychedelic experience and you hear people's stories and how wild it is. And I could tell some right now that would probably scare people away from ever doing it. And I'm most grateful for those ceremonies than any of them, right? Mm-hmm. One that comes to mind is when I did 5 MEO on top of a 6-gram mushroom experience. Like, what the fuck? But I trusted the space, and it ends up being one of the most profound experiences and growth-inducing experiences of my life, right? Because it shattered the illusion that I was given and allowed me to see past it into my own soul's expression of who and what I want to do in this incarnation. And that's the most beautiful thing these medicines can offer us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then I think it's a good place to kind of shift to then talking into what has grown since then. So I think you said that was 2022 or 2023. I'm not certain of when you actually hit that anxiety breaking point, left the job, sold the house, decided to make a change, and you've been building stuff since then. So let's get into what emerged out of this chrysalis of pressure and experience.
People that start, because it looks like you work with 5 MEO, mostly, at least that's what I've been able to pick up from your website and your podcasts and your Instagram and all the things, right? It's like you have an obvious connection with that medicine. I have a connection with the mushroom. That I have been called to serve its consciousness in whatever way that aligns with my design and how I can show up. And when I left the mortgage biz, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I just knew that selling my house would give me enough runway to begin that exploration. Yeah. It took me a few months to really get with it, but I kept going back to that day at the beach. And I'm like, although that experience wasn't what brought me to my full, it's a charged word, but awakened state, right? Where I felt authentic in how I showed up, in my love for self and how I saw the world, my sense of security and groundedness. Those all happened with deeper experiences, but none of that would have happened unless I took that microdose mushroom, right? Yeah. And so within a few months of quitting, I started Entheos Holistics, which is my microdose brand. And we do things a bit different. I really consider us more of a nutraceutical company that just happens to have psilocybin in the blends. So we pair the ancient wisdom of both Chinese and Ayurvedic medicinal knowledge. They have studied certain plants and herbs for, again, hundreds, when you go to Chinese medicine, thousands of years. Right. And so we pair different herbs and plants that stem from the knowledge of those two branches of medicine with psilocybin to create synergistic effects that promote a certain energetic or therapeutic use that we're wanting to invoke in an individual. And so the thing we've done differently is it's not just a microdose is a microdose is a microdose. The psilocybin is meant to be the mycelium. It's meant to be the bridge between all of the other ingredients, creating that synergistic effect, creating those energetic pathways within the body with all the beautiful things like quieting the DMN and neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, and what we're finding out psilocybin does to the gut now, which is pretty miraculous. To create blends that people can step into based on their set intention. And so that's what I've been building over the last 3 years since leaving the mortgage business, is how can I take the thing that changed my life, build something that is an authentic nature of my expression, and then give that back to people. The freedom that I have been able to touch and experience in my life, the joy, the happiness, the pleasure, the feeling of being driven by purpose that has come from that original first microdose is everything to me. And it set the pathway for the rest of my life. And that's what I want to give back to other people. And so taking it a level deeper, not just chocolates with cacao and mushrooms, it's like, what would happen if I mixed 12 intentional herbs together with the psilocybin in a way that people could build their own strength of experience? So you take 1, 2, or 3 capsules for very specific intentions. So like a social or a cognitive focus blend or an intimacy blend for your partner or an emotional regulation or a somatic experience or for energy in body movement or for the deeper explorations if you're just looking for a straightforward one, or one for pain and inflammation, right? Really starting to merge all of these worlds, even some of the modalities of allopathic, although not following that model, because even in a microdosing realm, I still believe that this operates in the mind, body, and soul, right? The way it's working in the mind, it's targeting our belief systems, our thought processes, our patterns. It's disrupting those because it lets us see behind, right, through that enhanced presence. And then the body, understanding emotions, like you mentioned, it's enlivening them, it's bringing them to the surface. And then I kept the image of soul just being now. It's the eternal present, right? Microdosing helps us connect all 3 of those aspects as well. And so with that, and then building the intentional blends, it's been really fun and profound to see how it's changing people's lives.
Yeah. So now I've got to ask you one of the kinds of questions that I ask people a lot, in the sense that I like to, sometimes I point out to people that I've been doing this podcast for 17 years now, and the scene has changed dramatically from when I started. So just if we go back 17 years ago, there would be no one in the world to come on the podcast and interview who is selling and marketing psilocybin microdose products, because they didn't exist.
Yeah.
This is all something that's very new. So whenever I get something that is like, oh, that's new, like this is something historically different from where I started this podcast, I always like to kind of dig in a little bit. So here's where I get to the question. So it's the same thing when I talk to people who are, I'm legally facilitating psilocybin experiences in Oregon. It's like, I want to know all the details. So here, when it comes to microdose, and I've had a few other microdose folks come on, but I don't think anybody who's been selling a product. So the question then is, so in the current legal framework around psilocybin, what's the deal, right? Most places psilocybin is not legal. There's places where it's been decriminalized, but there's a lot of people who are producing and marketing psilocybin microdosing products. Some of them are done through churches, so you're kind of using that religious freedom protection of this is our church, this is our sacrament, and we're providing it for our parishioners. But I don't think Entheos Holistics is going that route. So what is the deal in terms of what can you tell us about how legal is this? How do you market? How do you operate in sort of this weird kind of gray zone where we're at right now? So that's the historical question for you at this point. Yeah. Again, that 17 years ago, I wouldn't be able to ask anybody this question because it wasn't a thing. It's a thing now. So I'm asking you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think a lot of people shy away from that one, right? But I'm here for the challenges.
Yeah.
I am operating under a sanctuary. even Entheos, the name itself. So Entheos is the Greek root word of entheogen.
Yeah.
And that definition is the Entheos from the Greek perspective is connecting or reconnecting to the divine or the God within. And so even in the very name, it's like, I believe that in a microdose level, we are helping connect to the divinity that is within all of us. And I actually saw one of your podcast clips, and it's beautiful that you just held up the cup of water, because that was one of the ones I watched. And it's like, you mentioned, like, even this cup is God.
Yeah.
Because God is the infinite. It is the everything. Like the way that Taoism explains it, it is the all. Full stop. We don't need any other words. That it is the all, right? We have that within us. It's just this, and from a perspective of one of my favorite spiritual teachings, the law of one, it's like when we reincarnate, the entire purpose is the veil of forgetting. We are meant to come into this world and forget who we are so that we can journey back to the path of remembering who and what we are. So the very nature of the name itself, we are ingesting these things from a very, very sacramental, sanctuous perspective and point of view to reconnect to the part of the divinity that we hold within ourselves. And so everything we do is donation based, even on our website. And so we have on the website, we have set quote prices, but our customers get to choose their price across the board. And so if that price does not work for somebody, there's a simple quiz on the website. It's called the Access and Affordability Promise. You click on that. We ask that you read 2 quick pages of our mission, how we're here to serve and why we're here to serve. And then asks you 3 questions. 1, do you need a permanent use code? One or a 3-time use code, or a 1-time use code? And then a second question, what's your discount? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, up to 60% off. If you need more than 60, send us an email. Our customers have full autonomy over choosing what they pay for our product. So it truly is donation based. It's not like, here's a recommended thing. We have a posted price. Outside of that, you need no permission to go in and say, I actually want to get this for 70% off. Great. Here you go. And so it's that giving nature back, and what it really means to honor these sacraments and medicines and realize that I'm just a vessel to bringing these things for life. So that is one perspective. I am invoking the Religious Freedom Act, right? Because I actually grew up Christian for 19 years, twice a week church, 3 to 4 youth camps a year, deeply steeped in that philosophy, right? All the sexual trauma that came with it, all of the programming that came with it. And I remember when I left my mom's house, it was if you're living under this roof, you're going to church, right? And when I left, I immediately stopped, and I went to ASU. So it was a big party school. So I just went in a different direction, and I became very anti-God in a way for the next 12 years of my life until these medicines came in. And I actually just wrote a blog article yesterday about what it was like on my very first ever 1 gram experience of mushrooms. I felt the undeniable connection to God in a way that I don't need to explain it. And I know that word is charged, and I like source and I like universe, and there's so many ways. I don't give a shit. I think we use a million ways to explain the same thing. Even science, it even gets more hysterical when you really look at what science is saying. I'm like, okay, so you're saying it's God. It reconnected me with something that became so undeniable. And so undeniable in a way that I don't need anybody to explain it or break it down to me. Yeah. I've experienced something that is such a deep gnosis. I cannot forget that. That's what these medicines have brought me, and that's how we serve. So we are invoking the First Amendment right of religious freedom. And then also stepping into trust law, right? And I am just a vessel of carrying out the mission of the trust that the sanctuary is held within. And my legal obligation as trustee for this trust is to bring that mission to life, right? And so it has its own jurisdiction and its own bylaws and its own 22-page mission on how it wants to show up in the world and support the growth and evolution of every single one of us, starting with the divine consciousness that we all have within, and then birthing out into how we project in the world that we are all artists and we're all here to live out our dharma. That is what our mission is. And that is how I feel and know I am legally protected by staying within the bounds of what our Constitution has granted us.
All right. Well, I'm glad I asked you that question. Obviously, you had a very good answer on that. I'm just curious. I'm looking at for the listening audience, this is entheosholistics.com. And this is where the different products are listed in the different mushroom blends. Do we have a portion on the website that speaks to this aspect of Entheo Holistics?
So on the about, it'll go through that pretty extensively. And then also when they're signing up, so when you sign up for a username, there's 2 agreements. One of them is, do you understand our donation practices? Like, we are a sanctuary, you have autonomy over what you want to do. And then the kind of like a PMA agreement, but not really, but like the release of acknowledgement. Like, I understand how I'm partaking in this. So there's 2, I guess you call them disclaimers, where they can click and read through those before we let them sign up for an account on the website. It's like, hey, we want to make sure you understand what this is, how we're serving, how we want to serve, why we're serving in the capacity we do. And so we put out that for everybody to read.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, Austin. So let's turn to Austin West. Let's talk about Austin West. There's this website, I Am Austin West. Tell us a little bit about what you are offering there. And I think I mentioned before, you've got mentorship, you've got men's retreats and work. So let's talk a bit about that and what you're offering on that side of things.
Yeah, this has been exciting. I've been a coach for 4 years, but I've completely dropped that language. I don't like using coach. I don't like using mentor. Actually, all that language has changed on the website within the last day. So I wonder if you've seen the update or if it's not on a refresh yet. But just really getting away from these things, and I'm just working one-on-one, right? And I have small group microdose cohorts. I have the men's retreats. I'm launching my community Entheos collective in March, which will be like a very intention-based microdose collective, where we're going to have 10 hours of live support calls a week. So live journaling meditation calls. I'm going to have 2 different therapists leading psychedelic support and integration calls during the weeknights, and other different teachings, nervous system regulation. And the thing I'm most excited about, and this is also what's cool about, like, the deeper I go in this medicine path, I start to realize that everything coming through me, I'm just a witness to. Not attaching to any of it. I try to live my life from the seat of the observer as often as I can. And really, I'm not the one speaking. I'm just listening to myself talk. I'm not the one experiencing my thoughts. I'm just listening to my thoughts being run through my mind. And the more I'm able to really step back into the seat of the observer, I've had teachings and ideas really just channel through me. And so this will be the first time I'm actually sharing this one. And it's one I'm going to start teaching in my community. And it's what I'm calling the principles of consciousness. And I'm starting to weave this into all of my work, my microdosing cohorts, and all of the ways that I show up in that role. And it's really are you familiar with Hermetic philosophy?
Yeah. So
it's sort of like that, right? Hermetic philosophy is one of the most powerful teachings that has come into my life, from the perspective that I believe that the 7 Hermetic principles are the 7 underlining laws that essentially govern the universe. Like, these things are woven into all of existence. And when I started to be made aware and really integrate those teachings into my life, it allowed me to navigate everything with ease. Right? It's like, so the principle of rhythm, like, I'm in the shit right now. Okay, I just know I'm in the bottom, which means at the end of this, I'm going to be in the new peak. And that's the rhythm of life. And so it just helped me be more accepting of the things that would happen, right? Like, when I make decisions, am I balancing my masculine and feminine dynamics, or am I leaning too far the other way that I'm ignoring something that could be valuable with the other energetic to weave in? So anyway, it's similar to that. In the principles of consciousness, I teach this arc, which is truth, desire, catalyst, and evolution. And it's really a framework on understanding how our consciousness is interacting with our reality. And if we understand the rules of that interaction, you inevitably become the creator of your own life. You can't not become the creator once you understand these rules and how this thing operates. And that's what I'm doing in a lot of my work now. And that's what's been the most exciting thing, is this, watching this teaching pour through me over the last year, now getting to a place where I can understand it from a lens that I now use this in every moment of my life, and now able to teach that thing to others.
So you had mentioned that you were kind of more interested on one-on-one work. Are you still doing men's group work, or is that something that's going to be shifting?
Yep. So still doing men's retreats. Our next one's going to be coming up. I don't have the date on the website because we're debating between 3 weekends, but second or third, fourth weekend of April or first week of May. And so our men's retreats are 20 to 25 men out here in Austin on a 72-acre retreat center, owned by one of my brothers and guys who's one of the co-facilitators. There's 3 of us that run these retreats. They're focused on rites of passage experiences. So although there's a psychedelic aspect to them, the last one we did 72 acres is a lot of land. So what we did is everybody took anywhere from a quarter to 1 gram of mushrooms, and we did a communing on land day. So you went and we're actually walking around and integrating with the land instead of what a lot of people are like a closed ceremony. And, I've done retreats like that. It really depends on the feel and the vibe of what we're doing. But the men's retreats are really focused on rites of passage experiences, something that I believe that we have really lost as a culture. We've built in some of ours, like who can party the most or a driver's license. It's pretty abhorrent, the rites of passage experiences we've gotten built in for our teenagers these days. So the men's retreats are still on. We do 3 of those a year, just because they're a little larger than what most people are used to experiencing on a retreat. And then I'm excited to launch our microdosing cohorts. So those are going to kick off first week of April. Those would be 12-person co-ed. So those ones are for both, about building a relationship with this medicine and utilizing this practice for evolution. The purpose of this existence is to evolve. And when you're not evolving, that's when we enter the state of dis-ease, right? We're meant to be learning from every experience that happens in our life. And when you can learn to embody those teachings for your evolution, this shit becomes fun. Even when it's hard, it becomes fun. Even when I'm in the shit of it, I'm like, okay, there's something deep here for me. And I believe microdosing is one of the best ways to really learn and accept what's being delivered to us on the day-to-day level, right? Because you're functional, and that little 3-degree perspective shift can really bring us a new lens of awareness on how to relate to our life. And so I'm really excited about launching those cohorts. But most of my work has been one-on-one to this point.
Yeah. So to return to the topic of Austin, now we're talking about the town, not about you. I know that there definitely are quite a few different entheogenic psychedelic churches and religious organizations and ministries and stuff in Austin. It's a little bit of a hotbed for that kind of area. Do you do any kind of networking or cross-pollination with some of these other groups, or are you more focused on kind of doing your own programs and things? Like, what's your feeling there?
I do. A few of them use our microdoses as their integration, right? Because the way we built our blends, that they're meant to. And if anybody goes to the website and reads through, we have 4 different ways we explain the blend. So there's a therapeutic aspect, an energetic, a lifestyle optimization, and a use case. And so they're very, very targeted. So a lot of people that go on these retreats, that they'll have this experience, and during the integration phase, they're typically integrating a very specific aspect of their life or a specific thing that had come up for them. And so we partner with a few of the retreat centers out here. One of them is technically a church. The others are retreat centers, which I'm imagining on the back end they're a church as well, but I just refer to them as retreat center, and really helping kind of bring them back into their bodies and integrate the experience with our microdoses. But that's the extent of what I've done with them.
Yeah. Cool. So now to kind of come full circle back to kind of where we started with yourself and your own personal story. So at this point, how would you rate, especially compared to where you were before in your life, how is your sense of joy, fun, and self-love, worth, and value?
How is it in worth and value? Can you ask that a different way?
How is your sense of existing in a state of joy, authentic fun, and a sense of self-love, self-worth, and self-value compared to where you had been stuck before within your life, before undergoing this transformation and building this new life for yourself?
It's ineffable, man. I don't even know where to begin to explain the level of freedom and joy I can feel, even if I'm in the shit of it these days. even in the shit of it, I can still sit down and do my morning devotion and meditation and still be able to feel that level of love, gratitude, and joy pumping through my heart and solar plexus, right? Even when I'm moving through something that would have brought me to my knees 4 years ago, I'm able to stay in my heart and be loving and being expressive and just know that it's all so perfectly happening for me. It's, the level of joy I feel now, sometimes it like trips me out because I never knew that it was possible, which is like, kind of sad to say out loud and even admit that an older version of me never thought this joy I was worthy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be in a place where I not only feel, but know I am worthy of all of those emotions at whatever capacity I choose and want to feel them at any time I want to feel them. It's ineffable, man.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. Well, Austin, I've had you for a while now. Is there anything else that I have not asked you about that you'd like to touch on to kind of round out the interview, or how do you feel?
Nah, you're a great interviewer, man. I really appreciate your time.
I've been doing this a long time, man. Talk to a lot of people, and I enjoy it. And I want to thank you for reaching out, that you happen to hit me at just the right time, because I kind of go through periods where, I do a bunch of interviews and then, okay, I don't need to pay attention to interviews for like the next 5 months because I've got them all loaded up and they're all ready to go. And you hit me at just the right point where I've only got one more interview in the bank. It's like, okay, it's time to get some more interviews. And you happen to contact me. It's like, cool, man, email me your stuff.
Yeah. So, all perfect.
Yeah. And so I just want to remind the audience that we've got 2 different websites that you can learn more about Austin. The most obvious one, IamAustinWest.com. And then with the microdose mushroom blends, that's EntheosHolistics.com. And I would encourage anyone who, if you like what Austin's sharing here, you can obviously reach out and you can get to know him. And if you're in Austin, maybe hang out sometime.
We'll love that.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for your time today. And, congratulations on your journey. Like I've been saying, I've been doing this a long time, and it's kind of, there's a new phase that's happening right now with a lot of people kind of in a similar boat to yourself, where around 2020 or in these more recent years, like people kind of discovering the power of psychedelics to transform their lives and really taking in new directions. So there's kind of this whole new growth of what's happening, and it's a different cultural landscape than it used to be. This accessibility through entheogenic churches and religious organizations, the microdosing, the legal psilocybin therapy programs that are coming online. It's a different world from where I started with all of this. And so it's always interesting to document that and to have fresh voices and fresh faces. Well, not really faces, because this is only audio. I'm still old school. I don't want to put every interview I do with somebody on YouTube as a video. I still like listening. Like just listen rather than watching all the time. So fresh voices and fresh perspectives on the show. So thanks for coming on, Austin. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and it's been an enlivening conversation, and really enjoyed it.
Thank you, brother. Great time.